especially in the tech sector, you have people sitting on large, long-standing embedded capital gains. And so for people to understand what this means, it means you have to pay taxes on sales that you have not yet made. And even forget the stock market and think about even everyday Americans across this country. That means that if you're a farmer or if you're a small business owner, you will owe taxes with cash you literally do not have in your pocket to pay those taxes. That is a formula for a second Great Depression. And it is something that's been in the bloodstream of Democratic policy for a long time. Go back to Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders' plans of a wealth tax, even in the 2020 primary. I think this idea is here to stay for the Democrats. That's a big one. I think Tim Walz's selection as vice president says a lot. That's the first real presidential-style decision we've seen Kamala Harris have to make. She went with somebody who at the state level has favored increasing taxes on capital gains. In that case, it was unrealized, but they have talked about unrealized gains and taxing them. And I do worry about that, what that means, not just for the stock market, but for everyday Americans across the country.
The stock market, if there's not 60 votes for that in the Senate, the stock market doesn't have to price it.
Yes, 60 votes, or if you agree. I respectfully disagree with one aspect of that, because Kamala Harris has been the chief proponent of ending the filibuster to ram through her policy objectives. Yeah. And so if she's the president of the United States, and in my view, God forbid, a Democratic Senate to aid her, that could be 51 votes. And could you get to 51 votes on a major change in tax policy like that? I think the answer is absolutely yes. I think that's conceivable. And so for a lot of business leaders across the country, one of the questions they might want to ask is, which is going to be the administration that's more friendly to business? Well, we don't know where she stands on tariffs. We don't know where she stands on a lot of other questions. But on tax policy alone, the idea of not just raising tax rates, but raising tax rates and applying taxes on unrealized income, that is a catastrophe of epic proportion.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about more of Kamala Harris's insane economic policies that smart people and educated people recognize are very destructive, okay, that if implemented would be an absolute disaster. And when I say educated people, I don't mean college educated people, because college educated nowadays does not mean actually really educated, right? Really understanding the issues, okay, or being informed on the issues, right? It just means that you are indoctrinated into left-wing ideology, right? That's what that actually means, okay? Because you have some of these policies, they're so insane that even progressives like Khanna are coming out and slamming Kamala Harris and these policies that she is proposing. Like, for example, when it comes to the tax on unrealized capital gains, which, you know, anybody who is educated at all or understands how capital gain taxes work knows that this is an absolutely terrible proposal. However, you do have some propagandists on the left who are defending this proposal because they say, oh, no, normal, regular, everyday people don't need to worry about this because only the rich will be affected by the unrealized capital gains proposal from Kamala Harris. Take a look.
And so what about, I keep seeing this $100 million threshold as well. Explain, what is that?
So the 100 million threshold applies to unrealized gains. And so we just talked about capital gains. That's when you have an asset, you've actually now sold it, and you've collected the gains or the income from having sold that asset. Another important piece there, actually, that I should clarify too, is we're talking about tradable assets. So these proposals don't have anything to do actually with real estate. There are some proposals that are specific to real estate, but those also don't really kick in unless you've got like a $37 million estate or something like that, right? So we're not really talking about like the person that owns a couple of properties and then, you know, but on the unrealized gains, so you haven't sold it. And this is a very new kind of proposal. You haven't sold the asset. You're just holding on to some of these tradable assets. If you have over $100 million in value there, then you are now going to be subject to this 25% tax. And it's unusual because typically you don't get taxed until you've actually gotten the gains from selling that kind of asset. But why is Vice President Harris making this proposal? I think it's really important. So one, a couple of things. Like we just said, unless you have $100 million in value, this is irrelevant for you. So if we just said $1 million investment income is only getting to under 1% of the population, you can imagine 100 million. We're getting into like 0.0 something percent of the population at $100 million level. Actually, I think some of the estimates put it at like maybe between 10 and 60,000 people in our over 300 million person country that the unrealized gains proposal is relevant for. But anyway, why are they doing this? Because what now happens is if you have that vast wealth, you can just sit on it for your entire life and borrow against it.
Yeah, so I find it so hilarious how these people believe that, hey, you don't need to worry about this as the average everyday American because this won't apply to you. It only applies to people with over $100 million in assets. Don't worry about it. Except when you actually study history, like, for example, the history of the income tax back in the early 1900s, how did the income tax start? Well, the income tax started using the same rationale and argument that is coming from the left today, which is that, well, it's only for the rich, right? It's only for the rich, okay? Over 50% of the American people were not subject to that tax. I think back then it was single people making over $3,000 a year. And in today's dollars, the most conservative estimate, that would be about $56,000 a year. And for people in relationships, I think it was like $4,000, okay? And in today's dollars, it would be like $69,000 a year in the most conservative estimate. And what I mean by conservative is I'm using the lowest rate of inflation that is generally acceptable in regards to the rate of inflation over the past 100 or so years, okay, since that time period, right? So using some estimates in regards to the rate of inflation, that 3,000 could be well over $1 million, okay, in today's dollars, right? But I'm using the most conservative estimate, right? So if you're looking at it in today's dollars, okay, the way that the income tax started out, well, if you made less than about $56,000 a year, then you don't pay taxes, right? So under the most conservative estimates, about 60% of Americans, when the income tax was first introduced, they were exempt. They didn't have to pay taxes, again, because it was for the rich. Now, fast forward to today, okay? Is that still true, right? Is that still true? Okay, are 60% of Americans exempt from income taxes? No. As of 2022, about 60% of American households do pay income tax because these taxes always start off as, well, they're for the rich until the government figures out that, hey, we can apply this to more than just the rich. We can get more money. We can generate more revenue by taking money from people that we didn't intend to take the money from at first, but we figured out that, hey, this works so well on the rich, we can now extract money from the middle class. And you would be a damn fool if you didn't believe that that is what would happen with the unrealized capital gains tax proposal that is coming from the Democrats, right? From Kamala Harris. That's exactly what will happen. It always starts out as, well, this is just a tax on the rich. What are you talking about? You don't need to worry about it. Until 20 years later, now all of a sudden, you have the average American, middle class American, now they're subject to unrealized capital gains taxes. That's how it always works. Okay, that's how it always works. Furthermore, this type of unrealized capital gains tax in which you force individuals to sell their assets would have significant consequences in the market, right? I mean, it would basically tank the market, which, you know, a lot of people, their 401ks are invested in the market. They're invested in the S&P 500, in the total stock market funds, things like that. If you're forcing people to sell all these assets, right? Well, what happens? Well, what happens is that the value of the assets decline, right? Because you have more people selling the asset than that are buying the asset. And guess what? That will trickle down to the middle class, right? So that 401k that you got, when Democrats decide that, hey, we're going to start forcing billionaires to sell their assets with these unrealized capital gains taxes, yeah, that's going to tank your portfolio, right? That's going to tank your portfolio. It's going to affect when and if you can retire. There's also other reasons as well, too, that they're going to go into in this interview with Khanna and Joe Kernan. Joe Kernan is going to basically confront Khanna on the extreme policies of Kamala Harris. Joe Kernan has actually been on a crusade against the far left policies of the Democrats. It's actually been pretty stunning to witness somebody in the mainstream liberal media go after Democrats so hard on these proposals. But yeah, I want to react to this interview because her policy proposals are so crazy, right? So insane that even some progressives are just like, no, this is way too far, even for us.
We spent time talking about the idea of taxing investors on unrealized gains. Our next guest is looking at something we've also talked about quite a bit on this program, and Andrew's been talking about it for years. Bill Ackman recently talked about it with Jay Clayton, I think yesterday or the day before, and that's taxing loans related to the gains instead of trying to do it in a way that's probably not even possible to do. But Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California, his 17th district is located in the heart of Silicon Valley, and anybody that doesn't realize that that is a goose that lays golden eggs constantly for this country and for the world. He's joining us today. Well, it says in your capacity as a surrogate of the Harris-Walz campaign. I'm going to forget that. I'm going to say you're joining
Silicon
us
Valley.
today as my and as my running mate. If we
bottom of the ticket, Joe Rowe.
No. Rojo. I want a cushy job where I don't have to do anything, but I can take credit for things. I want the.
We need you in the Midwest. Anyway.
But you tweeted it out to me, unsolicited, I think last week. What about this idea? And we've talked about it. It bears, I think, some consideration and a conversation. I immediately hear from other conservatives, we don't need to raise taxes no matter what.
Right.
But there are founders of companies that start with nothing. They have $5 billion. They die and they pass it on to their heirs.
If you're using it as cash, it should be taxed.
It's never been taxed, ever. It's never been taxed.
But they're borrowing against it.
But they borrow against it, and the idea, and it's what you came up with.
Well,
why do you not want to do Kamala's idea? Well, or whoever came up with it. Why do you not want to do the Elizabeth Warren? Why do you not want to do that one?
Let me tell you why I don't think a blanket tax on unrealized gain is a good thing. I mean, let's say you're an entrepreneur. You create a company. It gets to 100 million or 200 million on paper. Now, if you're taxing that, you're probably going to force that person to sell it. They're probably going to sell it to private equity. Do you really want the entrepreneurs to be forced to sell their companies to larger institutions and to decline in value? I don't think that that's what you want for a startup ecosystem.
Unintended consequence. Jeff Bezos wouldn't have to do that. They're going after these very, I think the whole policy is demagoguing to go after these people that they say pay less of a tax rate than their maid does, and they have billions of dollars.
I get why, but this is not the right way to do it. And also, 95% of investments in startups fail, and so you're going to disincentivize investments in those startups. But here's what I think we can go after. You have folks, okay, they start to have capital appreciation, and then instead of realizing that, they take out a loan, which I call backdoor realization, to fund their entire lifestyle. They never pay tax on that. Then, when they die, they pass that money on to their heirs, and their kids never pay tax on that. So,
yeah. So you seen that, you heard that. Okay. So Ro Khanna here does not think that Kamala's idea is a good idea. Now he's proposing an alternate idea of taxing loans. Now the problem with this idea is that loans are not income. Okay, and this practice that they're talking about is actually less attractive when interest rates are higher, okay? Because what they're trying to do is that they're trying to stop billionaires from taking advantage of a loophole that really is a problem when it comes to the cost basis of the assets that they buy and then later pass on to their inheritance, right? So their children. So, for example, this is how the loophole works, and this is what they're trying to go after. For example, you have somebody like Elon Musk who has, I don't know, $100 billion, okay, in unrealized capital gains, okay, due to the assets that he owns in the stock market. He can take out a loan of $10 to $20 billion and finance his lifestyle using that loan without having to pay taxes on it because loans are not income, right? However, that loan has to be paid back at some point. Now, when interest rates are low, you tend to have billionaires just refinance the loan. So they will just pay off their past loan by taking out a new loan, and then they'll just continue to do that. But eventually the money has to be paid back, okay? And in a normal situation, you wouldn't need to tax the income from the loan because the tax that would be paid would come from paying the loan back by selling your assets, right? So Elon Musk would pay back that $20 billion loan he got by selling some of his stock, okay? And that's when the taxes would actually be paid, the capital gains taxes, okay? However, in order to get around that, there's a loophole, okay, that billionaires take advantage of based off the step up in cost basis that happens at the time of death of the original asset holder. So again, let's say that Elon Musk has $100 billion in unrealized capital gains. When he dies, that money, those assets, that is inherited by his family, okay, by his children, whatever, right? So what happens is that this thing called step-up basis. So now, instead of having $100 billion in capital gains, unrealized capital gains, now there's only zero at the time of his death because the cost basis of that asset increases to whatever the value of the asset is at the time of his death. So if his inheritance immediately sell his $100 billion worth of unrealized capital gains at the date of his death, then generally they wouldn't pay any taxes on it, right? So if Elon Musk financed his lifestyle using loans up into his death without selling any of his assets, then at the time of his death, his assets would then step up in cost basis to whatever the value of the asset was at the time of his death, which would result in zero capital gains taxes if his inheritance decided to sell the asset in order to pay off the loans that Elon Musk used in order to finance his lifestyle, right? So that is the loophole that they're talking about. Now, the way to solve that problem is not to tax loans, right? I think taxing loans is a bad idea, okay? A loan is not income. A loan is a loan. It has to be paid back eventually, right? In some shape or form. And if the loan is forgiven by the bank or whoever you borrowed the money from, then at that point, it becomes income. And it is taxed because you forgave the loan, right? A forgivable loan is taxed, okay? Because that technically would be income because you don't owe the money anymore, right? You don't have to pay it back. You're not liable to pay the money back, right? So while I think that taxing loans is a bad idea, the real issue here is the loophole of step-up basis, particularly for individuals who are ultra wealthy, right? We're talking about individuals that have billions of dollars in assets, right? You could do something like, for example, say, hey, step-up basis does not apply to individuals who at the time of their death, they have assets over a certain amount of money, right? So over $1 billion, hey, you know, you have to keep the original cost basis. Therefore, if the descendants of the deceased decide to pay off the deceased's loan that he used in order to finance his lifestyle without having to pay taxes, if they decide to pay off that money by selling the deceased assets, okay, at the time of death, then it's still subject to capital gains tax because the cost basis is the original cost basis that the original owner had at the time in which they acquired the asset, instead of it stepping up to the value of the asset at the time of the original owner's death. Okay, so I know all of this is confusing. This is financial jargon and stuff like that, but I'm explaining it to you guys because they're going to put out a lot of bad proposals, right? And the common sense proposals that they actually really should be putting out there to remove these loopholes or to close the loopholes that these individuals are taking advantage of, no, they don't do that, right? They never do that, okay? Something that, in my opinion, would be less controversial. Hey, you know, let's get rid of step-up basis for billionaires, right? Let's get rid of that. That is way less controversial than an unrealized capital gains tax. But again, when it comes to these Democrats, they just want to find new ways to tax people, right? Instead of dealing with the current issues that we have, in which you have people take advantage of the loopholes in the tax system. No, they don't want to close those. Okay, they rather just introduce some brand new insane tax that, in my opinion, will have a lot of negative consequences, a lot of negative externalities that liberals don't seem to be interested in thinking through before putting out these Looney Tunes proposals. But again, the fact that you have Khanna, who's a progressive, coming out here and saying, well, that's even too far for me in regards to Kamala Harris's unrealized capital gains tax proposal, tells you everything you need to know about how cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs this proposal actually is. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.